Hey everybody, getting ready to try TIG welding again. After the last video was uploaded, I sent a link, posted a link on the welding web forums, and I got some input from some people at TIG Weld and know what they're doing. And the general consensus was they believe the popping and the weird occurrence that I was seeing was actually that I was dipping my tungsten and just probably didn't see that I was doing it when I was doing it because I had kind of a weird torch angle. So the general thinking is that if I regrind some tungstens and keep practicing, that I should be able to eliminate that problem. So we're going to test that theory. One of the suggestions was that, well, not really a suggestion, but somebody had noted that I was working on a round piece, which creates some extra challenges. It's a little more challenging than a flat piece, so that I might want to start out on some flat pieces. So I got some flat junk pieces of stock, things that I can just try out. But the order of the day is sharpening tungstens. Now, last video, I think I talked about that I had this old junky homemade grinder that I had made out of an old jetted bathtub motor, and I had forgotten that the arbor on that, the shaft on the motor is not a very good arbor, so it's perfectly fine for the brush that I had on it. I just had that wire wheel brush on there because that thing doesn't need to really be balanced. But when you're talking about a grinding wheel, well, then things get a little bit hairy when you start trying to spin something with that kind of mass at that kind of RPM, and it's not perfectly balanced or out of whack. Things could get downright scary. So I decided that I would use this grinder. The problem with this grinder is that I do not have any extra wheels to fit it that are brand new. So I'm going to have to use these wheels. Now the problem with using a wheel, a used grinding wheel is, well, it's clearly evident in this wheel. I don't know if you could, the camera's going to pick that up. You can see the little shiny flecks reflecting off of that, indicating more than likely this wheel was used for grinding aluminum. So there's actually quite a bit of aluminum embedded in this wheel. So the problem is now if I grind my tungstens on that, I'm going to contaminate the tungsten with whatever metal that is. So since I do not have replacement wheels for this, I figure what I'm going to do is I'll dress these wheels, and I'll dress them down to a point where I don't see any more of this metal. And then we'll grind the tungstens on this. Yeah, so these wheels are smoked, to say the least. The only ones I didn't have any new ones, so the only thing I had was a couple of sets of these used ones I picked up at the tool store. In case anybody's wondering why I'm just doing this on the bulkhead steps instead of outside, that's because we got 14 inches of snow, roughly. And, well, it's just not that great out there. I don't know if this is showing up on the camera or not, but this is the tungsten I just removed that I was using. It's balled up on the end, and it looks like it's got metal deposited on it. I'm wondering if this is a pure tungsten that I've been using. You know what? I'm going to find one of those thoriated ones and try that. everybody, it's Sunday morning, March 25th or 26th, I forget. Well, anyways, right about now, many of you are probably saying, hey, where's the welding? You were just grinding tungstens a second ago. Well, that day that I was doing that, I ended up having to go away, and then when I came back, I didn't really have enough time to set up the cameras and everything, and I just wanted to get some practice in. So, to be perfectly honest, I actually did my second welding attempt and did not record it. I'm going to try my third attempt this morning, but let me show you what ended up happening with the welds that I did attempt on that day. So I was at the junk tool store and I found these old parallels in a box for 25 cents a piece, and I grabbed 3 of them just to use for practice welding because they're nice clean metal and they're not going to be missed. They're actually usable parallels. I probably could have kept them, but I've got so many of these I don't really care. So I wanted to have something to practice welding on, and that's why I got them. And I had one piece that was shorter, and that's the piece I used first. So this is just to show you what I started with. The thickness of the metal, I'm not quite sure how thick that is, and I don't have a caliper handy, so you can just kind of see. All right. This is what the piece looked like when I finally quit for the day. Now, that's actually not the side. There we go. All right. So, I actually came out pretty decent, I thought. I did a pretty good job, you know, for a noob. So, over here, this area right over here, this is mostly just me using the torch, getting the pool to form, visualizing the pool and moving along. And then later on, when I felt comfortable doing that, I started to I grabbed some filler metal and I started to work on the whole idea of adding filler metal to the molten pool and the puddle. And I was doing pretty decent. That one actually came out, I thought, pretty nice. And for the most part, it was pretty uneventful. I thought I didn't have any more of the problems with that popping. I did make a conscious effort to keep my torch angle more proper. And the other thing too is I did have that thoriated tungsten in there that I had ground to a point. And I'm still not convinced that tungsten, that old tungsten that was in that gun when I got it, for all I know, I guess that could have even been a pure tungsten. So I'm wondering whether or not, you know, molten bits of that tungsten were falling off at the end of the tip and I didn't even realize it. Either that or I was just dipping it in the puddle and didn't realize it. But that seems like pretty much those times when it would just, the arc would stop and then there'd be a pop. Pretty much was the tungsten somehow coming in contact with the puddle. Either me dipping it or, like I said, the tip of the tungsten actually melting and dripping into the puddle. I'm not sure which, because that tungsten did look kind of gnarly. So before I go any further, I'm going to splice in some photographs, but I'm going to show you some photographs of these welds up close, some high resolution photographs. And then the other thing I want to show you is I want to show you what the tip of the tungsten looks like now that I finished. And unfortunately, I wish I had gotten a good shot. Well, I think I do have, let's see, on the video that I did where I was grinding the tungstens, if it came out, you could probably get an idea of what the tip looked like when I started. And I want you to see what the tip looks like now. Because my concern now is that the point on the tungsten seems to, well, pretty much go away a lot more quickly than I had expected it would. So I'm wondering if I've still got something set up wrong. Okay, so those last couple photos I had removed the tungsten so I could lay it on a flat surface and the camera could really focus and you could really see what I am seeing on the tungsten that was concerning me. It's almost as if the tip has just completely eroded away. There's also about this first 3/16 or so of discoloration here. Actually, it's even more than that, close to probably 5/16. I don't know if that's normal or not. You also see this really high heat area here. So I'm wondering whether or not something is going on with my welder or not. I don't know. Anyways, once the tungsten gets to this point right here, it seemed like I was having a little bit more trouble with the weld pool swimming around. And I guess that would be because there's no longer a point. So I wish I had taken some high resolution photos of my grind before I did this. So what I'm going to do this morning is I'm going to regrind a point on the tungsten, only this time I'm going to use my drill to spin the tungsten as I'm grinding it to try and get a more uniform point. But I think I thought I did a pretty good job of making a point. And what I did was I made a sharp point, and then I was perpendicular to the wheel just for a second to put a flat spot on the end, basically a truncated point. I believe that's what that's called when you do it that way. But so this morning I'm going to regrind it. I'm going to take some high resolution photos of the tungsten before I start welding, and then hopefully if I weld without dipping it, we can look at it at the end and see what's happening. Alright, so there's what I'm starting with for a tip. The angle might be a little bit too steep or too shallow. In other words, the point where the grind starts to the tip might be a little shorter than I want it to be. But I'm going to go with this for right now. And I did put a little flat spot on the very end there. That's what I read was recommended. So, I don't know, we'll see. One other quick thing before I try this again. On my first attempt, the video showing my first attempt that I posted on Welding Web, and some people actually commented on it, gave advice. One of the other things was one person mentioned that they thought the stick out of my tungsten was too far. So I shortened that up on this last attempt that I didn't film, where I showed you guys the work I was doing there. But the reasoning I had for that stick out on the last attempt, or on the first attempt I should say, was I think I had read that the stick out should be 3 to 4 times the diameter of the tungsten. So right now I'm using a 3/32 tungsten. So if we multiply that by 3 times, that's a 9/32, which is 0.2812. So I'm going to set my stick out at 0.2812 and see how that looks. So I'm just curious. That's actually what I thought looked pretty comfortable to me. And then when I come over here and I look at, I've got my caliper set to 0.2812, and that's quite a bit shorter than what I've got right now. I really need to be able to visualize the puddle better. I prefer a little more stick out, quite frankly, just at this point in my training. I guess a compromise would be, let me set this to 4 times the diameter. So 4 times the diameter is 12/32, which is 6/16, which is 3/8, which is 0.375. And so that's what 4 times the diameter of the tungsten looks like. To stick out. How many of you guys out there right now are laughing their asses off at the fact that I'm using digital calipers to set the stick out? You know, the guys who know what they're doing, they probably don't even measure it. They probably just eyeball it and just know, hey, that's good. Alright, so this is probably the last you're going to hear from me until I'm done welding, because I'm going to gear up with all the safety gear. This is the camera I tried getting arc shots with, and it will not focus. So I'm going to use the GoPro, which is this weird fixed focus deal where it seems to not care what distance it is away. I'm going to suit the GoPro up with a shade and hopefully get some arc shots with the GoPro this time. and we'll use this for the other shots.
Alright, so what's my analysis? My analysis is that, hey, I think I actually can learn how to TIG weld. A couple of observations. I noticed that as I'm going along, I have a tendency to start lifting the torch up too high. I'm so scared about that weld puddle rising up as the filler metal fills it in and getting too high and hitting the tip that I tend to overcompensate, I think, and pull the torch up. But the good thing is, what I noticed is, even if I'm having trouble visualizing that I'm actually doing that, the sound from the arc is actually telling me when I'm starting to get too long. When that arc gets long, it's sort of like arc welding, stick welding, I meant to say. Same thing with stick welding. If your arc gets too long with stick welding, obviously at some point it'll extinguish, but you can still maintain an arc that might be too long, but it has a different sound. So your ears are, I think, as important as your eyes sometimes when it comes to TIG welding. So as that arc starts to get long, I all of a sudden I notice that there's a sound change, and then I bring the arc back in tight, and eventually I think I'll get used to what a correct arc sounds like and be able to keep it a little more dialed in. Also, I gotta get, again, so worried about hitting the tungsten with the filler metal, I stay a little bit too far behind the puddle sometimes, or at the edge of the puddle, and then I'll move the torch forward before I get the filler metal out, and so the filler metal will stick momentarily, and then I got to come back and reheat that area a little bit just to get my filler metal out. Especially like on the end here, I really got it stuck. Other observations: noticed how much more quickly the weld puddle forms, and how much more fluid it is when you're on the edge of a piece of metal. And I have to believe, well, I think that's just the science of that there's no metal on this side to conduct and pull that heat, help pull that heat away. So in other words, when I'm doing this bead here, you have metal on both sides that's kind of trying to diffuse that heat throughout the whole piece. And when you get to an edge like this, I believe what's happening is you've got no metal on this side, so this just superheats a lot more quickly. So I think the key maybe is on an edge is to use a little less amperage to back off on the pedal. Last thing is, it seems like I was going pretty quickly and it was kind of hard to keep up sometimes. You can see right here, in this corner right here, I actually got almost a decent, that whole stack of dimes theory there. Kind of had something going here, not too bad. This bits and pieces got a mess here and there. Yeah. And then over here, when I found out, when I realized that I was dabbing so fast.
Battery just died on the other camera, so we'll switch over to this one. So what I started to say was, when I did this bead right here, I was noticing that the filler metal was going in and melting so quickly, I just gave up on the dab and just tried keeping it in the puddle and just moving along with it and feeding it in. And I believe this is what's described by professionals as the lay wire method, but I think I was kind of going in the wrong direction. I was holding the torch in my right hand and going to the right and kind of chasing the puddle with the filler metal. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I believe the proper lay wire method is to actually keep the wire in the groove, like say it's a corner joint, to keep the wire in here and move the torch from, if it's in my right hand, to move the torch from right to left and follow the filler metal wire and lay it in, and as it melts, just keep feeding it in. So going from this direction to this direction instead of chasing the puddle this way. So I kind of did that backwards, but actually, I'm looking at it, it's actually not a bad looking little weld there, So before I close out this episode, I just want anybody who's watching this who'd like to give feedback, I want you to keep in mind that my first project, the reason why I'm teaching myself TIG welding is I have a shaft that I need to repair. So I'm going to turn down a approximately 1-inch diameter shaft on my lathe, a damaged area, and I want to be able to build that shaft back up with TIG welding so that I can then machine it to my final needs. So I will be doing a TIG weld, replacing that metal that I remove with TIG weld. So if anybody has any tips on that, I'm already thinking I'm probably going to try and cobble together some sort of welding positioner so that I can rotate the shaft as I go along, because I noticed that for whatever reason, when guys build up a shaft, let's pretend for a moment that this pink, that my gas cup here is actually the shaft in question. I noticed that guys tend to run their beads along the shaft outside like that as it's rotating. So they'll build up one bead, and then they'll come over here and they'll build up the next, and the next, and the next, and the next. In other words, they go around the entire shaft, one ring, and then another ring of weld, and another ring of weld. So a welding positioner would be really helpful so that it slowly rotates the shaft as I'm going along. So my question is, since I don't have a welding positioner, what is the downfall to me welding a bead in a line on the shaft in this direction? In other words, weld the bead like this, manually rotate the shaft over a little bit. Well, I could probably lay down one, two or three beads, then rotate the shaft manually, and then 1, 2, 3. In other words, what's the drawback to having the weld beads run this way parallel to each other instead of going around? Because if I could do it that way, then I don't need a welding positioner. I could set this thing up on V-blocks with clamps and do what I need to do on one part, stop. Not a bad idea to let it cool down anyways a little bit, rotate it, do some more beads, that kind of thing. So I'd really like to know what your thoughts are on that. All right, take care.